My name is Nina Reyes. I am 29 years old and a registered nurse by profession. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I opened it. I knew what it said. My mother had made her position clear over the phone 2 weeks earlier, her voice sharp with disappointment. We will not attend this wedding, Nina. You are throwing your life away on a man with no ambition, no status, no future. When you come to your senses, we will talk. The dial tone that followed felt like a door slamming shut. I stood in my tiny apartment, staring at the formal response card that simply read, "Regretfully decline," in my father's careful handwriting. No explanation. No apology. Just rejection, neat and final. I pressed my palm against the counter and breathed slowly, the way I taught anxious patients in the emergency room. My wedding was in 6 weeks. The invitations had been sent. The venue was booked. And my parents had chosen pride over their only daughter. I met Christopher Hayes on a Tuesday afternoon at the Riverside Community Center, where I volunteered teaching basic health literacy classes to elderly residents. He ran art therapy sessions in the room next door, his gentle voice carrying through the thin walls as he encouraged stroke survivors to paint their feelings. I noticed him first because of his patience. An elderly man struggled to hold a brush, frustrated tears streaming down his weathered face. Christopher simply moved his chair closer, held out his own hand, and painted alongside him until the man's breathing steadied. When our sessions ended, Christopher smiled at me in the hallway. "You're the nurse who brings her father here for the support groups, right?" he asked. Something in his recognition of my quiet struggle made my chest tighten with unexpected warmth. We started having coffee after our sessions, then dinner, then everything. My parents arrived in America from the Philippines when I was 3 years old. My father, once a respected engineer in Manila, worked as a night janitor while taking certification courses during the day. My mother cleaned houses, her hands raw and blistered from chemicals and hard work. They built a life from nothing, their eyes always fixed on the future they imagined for me. Medical school. A successful career. Marriage to someone who matched their ambitions for respectability and financial security. When I became a nurse instead of a doctor, I saw disappointment flicker across their faces, though they said nothing. When I chose emergency room work over a comfortable private practice position, they asked pointed questions about my judgment. But when I introduced them to Christopher, a social worker who drove a 10-year-old sedan and rented a modest apartment, their silence turned cold. The stroke happened on a Thursday evening, sudden and devastating. My father collapsed in the backyard while trimming hedges, his left side going completely numb. By the time the ambulance arrived, precious minutes had passed. I met them at the hospital, still in my scrubs from my own shift. The neurologist's prognosis was cautious. Significant motor function loss. Months of therapy ahead. Uncertain recovery. My mother stood frozen in the hallway, her proud shoulders finally bowing under the weight of fear and exhaustion. In that moment, I saw them differently. Not as the stern, ambitious parents who pushed me relentlessly forward, but as immigrants who had sacrificed everything and now faced losing their independence. I made a decision that night without hesitation. I would take care of them, no matter what it cost me. For 18 months, I restructured my entire life around their recovery. I picked up extra shifts to cover their medical bills and physical therapy costs. I drove my father to appointments 3 times a week, sitting in waiting rooms with medical journals I was too exhausted to read. I helped my mother navigate insurance paperwork, cooked meals they could afford, and watched their savings disappear despite my contributions. My own dreams went into a drawer. The advanced certification program I had been accepted into was deferred. The down payment I had saved for an apartment evaporated. I stopped seeing friends, stopped painting, stopped everything except work and caregiving. My parents never asked me to sacrifice so much. But they never told me to stop, either. They simply accepted my devotion as their due, the natural order of filial duty that defined their understanding of family. Christopher appeared during the darkest period of my exhaustion. I was sitting in the community center parking lot after dropping my father off for his stroke survivor support group, too tired to drive home for the 2-hour wait. Christopher tapped on my window, concern creasing his forehead. "Nina? Are you okay?" I realized I had been crying without noticing, tears streaming down my face while I stared blankly at the steering wheel. He opened my door, sat on the curb beside my car, and simply listened as everything poured out. The medical bills. The fear. The loneliness of watching my parents struggle. The guilt I felt for wanting my own life back. Christopher did not offer empty platitudes or advice. He just sat with me in my pain until the weight of it felt less crushing. Then he said something that changed everything. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Our relationship grew slowly, carefully, in the stolen moments between my shifts and obligations. Christopher understood my limitations without resentment. When I canceled dates to take my father to therapy, he offered to drive us instead. When I fell asleep during movies from exhaustion, he covered me with a blanket and let me rest. He met my parents multiple times, always polite and deferential, bringing small gifts and asking thoughtful questions about their lives in the Philippines. My father, still struggling with speech, would nod quietly. My mother would smile tightly and change the subject. I could feel their assessment of him, cold and dismissive. He drove an old car. He worked in social services, a field they considered beneath my education. He had no family wealth, no impressive connections. In their eyes, Christopher was proof that I had given up on becoming someone important. The proposal happened on the anniversary of my father's stroke, a deliberate choice by Christopher that I only understood later. We were walking along the river path near the community center after our volunteer sessions. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and amber. Christopher stopped at a bench where we had shared our first real conversation. Nina, he said, taking my hands, you have spent the last year and a half being strong for everyone else. You have been your parents' caregiver, your patient's advocate, and everyone's rock. But who takes care of you? His eyes were bright with emotion. I want to be that person. I want to stand beside you, not because you are perfect or because you have everything figured out, but because you are kind and brave and real. Will you marry me? The ring was simple, a small sapphire flanked by tiny diamonds. I said yes through tears, feeling something I had not felt in months. Hope. I told my parents about the engagement the following Sunday over dinner, a meal I had cooked in their kitchen like I did every week. My father sat at the table, his recovering hand gripping a fork with determined concentration. My mother was slicing vegetables with mechanical precision. I placed my hand on the table, letting the ring catch the light. Christopher proposed. I said quietly, "We are getting married in June." The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother's knife stopped mid-cut. My father looked up, his face unreadable. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice perfectly controlled. "This is a mistake, Nina. You are settling. You deserve better than a man who will struggle his entire life. We did not sacrifice everything to watch you throw away your potential on someone who cannot provide the life we dreamed for you." Her words landed like stones in my chest. The argument that followed was the worst we had ever had. My father, limited by his stroke-affected speech, communicated his disappointment through heavy silences and head shakes. My mother was more direct, listing Christopher's inadequacies like a prosecutor building a case. His modest income, his lack of ambition, his unremarkable family background. "You think love is enough?" she demanded. "Love does not pay bills. Love does not build security. We loved each other when we came to this country with nothing, and look what it cost us. Years of suffering, working terrible jobs, being invisible. You have a chance to do better, and you are choosing to repeat our struggles." I listened until I could not listen anymore. Then I said the words that created the unbridgeable divide. "You do not get to control my life as payment for your sacrifices. I did not ask you to suffer for me. That was your choice." The weeks that followed were marked by painful silence. My parents stopped answering my calls. When I arrived for my usual Sunday dinner, the door was locked and the lights were off, though I could see movement inside through the curtains. I left groceries on the porch and drove home, tears blurring the highway lights. I still sent the wedding invitation, addressed in careful calligraphy to Mr. and Mrs. Reyes. I included a handwritten note inside. "I will always love you. I hope you will be there to see me marry someone who loves me the way you loved each other when you first came to America, with nothing but hope and partnership. Your daughter, Nina." 2 weeks later, the response card came back. "Regretfully decline." No phone call. No explanation. Just those 2 words that said everything. I threw myself into wedding planning as a distraction from the grief. Christopher's family was small but warm. His mother had passed away from cancer 5 years earlier, a loss he still carried quietly. His father had died when Christopher was a teenager. He mentioned a grandmother once, an elderly woman who lived modestly and kept to herself, but he was vague about details. Family is complicated for me too, he said when I pressed. But we will build our own family, Nina. One based on choice, not obligation. The wedding would be small, intimate, held at a historic garden in the city. I invited my colleagues from the hospital, friends from nursing school, and the elderly residents from the community center who had become like surrogate grandparents. The guest list was unpretentious, full of people who knew me as I was, not as someone's daughter or someone's potential. There was one guest I debated adding until the last moment. Eleanor Winters was a patient I had cared for during her hospital stay 6 months earlier after a minor heart event. She was 78, soft-spoken, and always reading thick books on philanthropy and social justice when I checked her vitals. We had connected over conversations about healthcare inequality and the struggles immigrant families faced navigating the medical system. After her discharge, I was surprised to discover she volunteered at the same community center where Christopher and I taught our classes. She came every Thursday, dressed simply in cardigans and practical shoes, organizing donated books and chatting with other seniors. I often saw her sitting quietly in the corner during my father's support group sessions, though we never discussed it. Something about Eleanor felt both familiar and mysterious, like she was watching the world with ancient, knowing eyes. I added Eleanor's name to the guest list without much thought, simply wanting to include the community center family that had supported me through my hardest year. I hand-delivered her invitation one Thursday afternoon. Eleanor was shelving books in the community center library, her movements slow but precise. "A wedding invitation," she said, surprised. "Nina, I am honored. But why invite an old woman you barely know?" I smiled. "Because you have been kind to me, Eleanor. You always ask about my father's progress. You listen when I talk about the challenges at the hospital. And I think Christopher mentioned you were his grandmother, though he has been mysteriously secretive about family." Eleanor's expression shifted slightly, something sharp and assessing flickering behind her gentle eyes. "Yes," she said carefully. "I am Christopher's grandmother, and I would be delighted to attend." What I did not know was that Eleanor Winters was not who she appeared to be. Her full name was Eleanor Winters Harrington, and she was one of the wealthiest philanthropists in the state. Her late husband had built a technology empire in the early days of Silicon Valley, and Eleanor had quietly managed a foundation worth hundreds of millions of dollars for 2 decades. After her husband's death 3 years earlier, she had deliberately stepped away from public life, exhausted by the superficial relationships and constant requests that came with visible wealth. She moved to a modest apartment, volunteered anonymously, and watched the world without the distorting lens of money and status. When her only grandson, Christopher, introduced his work at the community center, Eleanor began volunteering there too, curious to understand the life he had chosen away from family wealth. That was where she met me, watched me, and saw something that had been missing from her life for years: authenticity. Eleanor had observed me for months without revealing her identity. She saw me bring my father to therapy sessions, patiently encouraging him through his frustration and setbacks. She watched me volunteer after long hospital shifts, teaching elderly immigrants about medication management and preventive care with a kindness that never wavered despite my obvious exhaustion. She noticed how I treated everyone the same, from the community center director to the janitor who cleaned the bathrooms, learning their names and asking about their families. Most importantly, she saw how I loved Christopher, not for what he could provide or who he might become, but for his character and his gentle, unwavering heart. In me, Eleanor recognized the value she had hoped to find in someone worthy of her grandson. And she began to plan something extraordinary. 3 weeks before the wedding, my mother called for the first time in months. Her voice was strange, higher-pitched and urgent. "Nina, I saw the guest list." I was confused. "How did you see the guest list, Mom?" There was a pause. "Your cousin mentioned it. She said she heard Eleanor Winters is attending. Is that true?" My stomach dropped. I had not realized my extended family gossiped about my wedding details. "Yes, Eleanor is coming. She volunteers at the community center." "Why?" My mother's breath came faster. "Nina, do you know who Eleanor Winters is?" "She is Eleanor Winters Harrington, the billionaire philanthropist. Her foundation just donated $10 million to the Children's Hospital downtown. It was in the news last week. Why is she coming to your wedding?" I sat down slowly, processing this information. Eleanor, my quiet, book-reading friend, was a billionaire? It seemed impossible. The revelation about Eleanor's identity changed everything for my parents. Within hours of that phone call, my mother called again. Then my father, struggling through his speech difficulties to tell me they had reconsidered their position. They wanted to attend the wedding after all. They had overreacted and hoped I could forgive them. The sudden reversal was transparent and painful. They did not want to celebrate my marriage. They wanted access to Eleanor Winters Harrington, to the wealth and connections she represented. When I confronted my mother about the timing, she became defensive. Can we not change our minds? Can we not realize we made a mistake? But her voice carried no warmth, no genuine remorse. Only calculation. I felt something harden inside my chest. My parents had rejected me when they thought I was marrying beneath my potential. Now they wanted to attend because a billionaire would be present. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I did not tell them no. Instead, I said something that surprised even myself. You can come. But understand this, you do not get to pick and choose when I am your daughter based on who is watching. You rejected this wedding. You rejected Christopher. You rejected me. I will not turn you away, because I am not like you. But you will sit where you belong. My mother started to protest, but I continued. The wedding is in 2 weeks. You are welcome to attend. The ceremony starts at 4 o'clock. I hung up before she could respond. Christopher found me sitting on our apartment balcony, staring at nothing. When I told him what happened, he pulled me close. Whatever you decide, I support you. But Nina, you do not owe them anything. I knew he was right. But I also knew I needed to do this my way, not out of revenge, but out of something deeper, integrity. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and clear, the kind of perfect June day that feels impossible to plan but somehow manifests anyway. I stood in the bridal suite of the garden venue, my hand shaking slightly as I fastened my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one piece of family jewelry my mother had reluctantly passed down years earlier. My maid of honor, Keisha, a fellow nurse who had worked beside me through countless overnight shifts, adjusted my veil with gentle hands. You look beautiful, she whispered. And you are doing the right thing. Through the window, I could see guests arriving. My hospital colleagues in their best dresses and suits. The elderly residents from the community center, moving slowly but dressed with care and dignity. Eleanor arrived in a simple but elegant navy dress, no jewelry except small pearl earrings. She looked like exactly what she had always been, a kind, understated woman of grace. Then I saw my parents' car pull into the parking lot. My father emerged first, leaning on his cane, dressed in an expensive new suit I had never seen before. My mother followed in a designer dress and heels, her hair professionally styled, her face set with an expression I recognized from childhood, the mask she wore when she wanted to impress important people. They looked out of place among my other guests, overdressed and too formal, like they were attending a corporate gala rather than a garden wedding. I watched them scan the crowd, searching, and I knew exactly who they were looking for. When they spotted Eleanor talking quietly with Christopher near the rose arbor, my mother's face lit up with calculated interest. She started moving in Eleanor's direction, my father trailing behind. I made a decision in that moment. I walked downstairs, still in my wedding dress, and intercepted them at the garden entrance. Mom. Dad. They turned, startled to see me before the ceremony. My mother recovered quickly, her smile bright but hollow. Nina, darling, you look beautiful. We are so happy to be here. We were just hoping to introduce ourselves to Mrs. Winters before the ceremony begins. I looked at them for a long moment, these people who had shaped my entire life with their expectations and disappointments. There has been a change in the seating arrangements, I said calmly. Follow me. I led them not to the front rows where parents traditionally sat, but to the very back section of the garden, where folding chairs had been set up under the shade of old oak trees. Already seated there were Hector, the hospital janitor who always had coffee ready for the night shift nurses, Maria and Luis, the housekeeping staff who cleaned patient rooms with quiet dignity, Carmen, the home health aide who had helped care for my father during his early recovery and who I had personally invited. I gestured to 2 empty seats. These are your seats. My mother's face went pale, then flushed with anger and humiliation. Nina, what are you doing? We are your parents. We sit in the front row. I met her eyes without flinching. You are my parents. But these are the people who were there for me when you chose not to be. They are the people who see worth in others regardless of job titles or bank accounts. You will sit here, or you will leave. Choose now. My father reached for my hand, his recovering grip weak but earnest, his eyes filled with something that might have been shame. My mother opened her mouth to argue, but I had already turned away, walking back toward the venue entrance where Keisha waited with my bouquet. Behind me, I heard the rustle of fabric as my parents reluctantly took their seats. The wedding was about to begin, and I felt strangely free, as if I had finally set down a burden I had been carrying my entire life. The ceremony was perfect in ways I had not imagined. Christopher stood at the altar with tears streaming down his face as I walked down the aisle, my arm linked not with my father but with Keisha, my chosen family. The officiant spoke about partnership and respect. We exchanged vows we had written ourselves, promising to support each other's dreams and build a life based on shared values rather than external expectations. When Christopher slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt the weight of my parents' judgment finally lift. Then came the moment I had not anticipated. Eleanor stood from her seat in the third row and approached the microphone set up for toasts. She smiled at Christopher, then at me, her eyes warm but carrying an authority I had never seen before. "May I say a few words?" Eleanor asked. I nodded, curious and slightly nervous. Eleanor's voice carried clearly through the garden. "My name is Eleanor Winters Harrington, and I am Christopher's grandmother. I have lived a long life and seen many things, but rarely have I witnessed the kind of character Nina has demonstrated. When I first met her, I was just another elderly volunteer at a community center, invisible in the way old women often are. Nina treated me with the same respect she showed everyone, never knowing who I was or what I could offer. I watched her care for her father with endless patience. I saw her volunteer after exhausting hospital shifts, teaching and helping others when she had nothing left to give. Most importantly, I saw her love my grandson not for his potential or his prospects, but for his heart." Eleanor paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd until it landed on my parents in the back row. "True character is revealed not in what we do when we are being watched, but in how we treat others when there is nothing to gain. Nina has shown me that goodness still exists in this world, untainted by ambition or greed." She turned back to me, her expression soft. "Which is why I am honored to announce the creation of the Nina Reyes Healthcare Foundation, funded with an initial endowment of $20 million. This foundation will provide scholarships, support, and mentorship for children of immigrants pursuing careers in healthcare. Nina, you have given so much to others. Now let others give back to you. Use this foundation to change lives the way you have changed mine by showing me that kindness and integrity still matter more than wealth or status." The garden erupted in applause. Christopher wrapped his arms around me as I stood frozen in shock, tears streaming down my face. In the back row, my parents sat motionless, their faces masks of dawning horror as they realized the magnitude of what they had rejected. The man they dismissed as inadequate was the grandson of a billionaire. The daughter they tried to control had earned something they could never buy, genuine respect and love. And in their pursuit of status and connection, they had lost the one thing that mattered most, their relationship with me. I looked at them one last time across the garden, feeling not triumph but profound sadness. Then I turned toward my husband, toward Eleanor, toward all the people who had loved me without conditions. This was my family now, and it was more than enough.